boa tarde a todos. Eu vou só cumprimentá-los, ter o prazer de vos cumprimentar em português, mas de facto vamos fazer esta sessão em inglês para que o nosso palestrante possa seguir e interagir de uma maneira muito direta durante toda a sessão. Quem precisar tem obviamente tradução simultânea. And so I would like to welcome you all to this panel, where we'll discuss to what degree can meditation and mental training can be used as a tool for the neuroscientific study of the brain. I'm going to start by introducing the panel. Matthieu Ricard has a PhD in cellular genetics, which he obtained in 1972 at Institut Pasteur in Paris under the supervision of Nobel laureate François Jacob. He elected to abandon a scientific career in biomedical research and has dedicated the past 40 years of his life to practicing and studying Tibetan Buddhism. He regularly participates in scientific meetings addressing the effect of meditation on the brain, such as the Mind and Life Institute initiatives promoted by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Professor Alexandre Castro Caldas, on my left, is a distinguished neurologist, retired full professor of neurology at the University of Lisbon, and former head of the Department of Clinical Neurosciences at Hospital de Santa Maria. He's currently director of the Institute of Health Sciences of Universidade Católica. Professor Castro Caldas' current research interests include several topics in cognitive neurosciences, and in particular the modulatory effect of environmental stimulation on the human brain. On my far left, João Relvas has a PhD in molecular genetics. After postdoctoral studies at the University of Cambridge and in Switzerland, he returned to Portugal and is currently coordinator of the Neuroscience Research Group and group leader of the Glial Cell Biology Lab at IBMC Porto. He's also a professor at the University of Porto, and he develops original work in the study of myelination. My name is João Ferraz Lacerda. I'm a hematologist at Hospital de Santa Maria, associate professor of medicine at the University of Lisbon, and group leader at Instituto de Medicina Molecular. My field of medical research is the study of immune modulation after bone marrow transplantation, and I have a personal interest in meditation and in Tibetan Buddhism. So the format of this session will be the following. Matthieu Ricard will give a presentation on the neuroscientific study of the brain, after which the panel will address a number of topics, including current scientific evidence for the effect of meditation on the brain and process-specific learning, methodologies, etc. After which the audience yourselves will also be invited to participate with questions bearing on these issues. And so without further delay, we would start your presentation. Matthieu, thank you very much, and thank you very much for being here.
I'm very pleased and honored to be with you tonight. I'm a bit humbled because I'm afraid on the scientific level, with such a prestigious panel and audience, I'm feeling like more like passing an exam. I'm 68 years old, so it brings back some memories for a long time ago. But if I say from the start that I'm not a real neuroscientist, by all means, I'm just a flying guinea pig who goes from lab to lab. I can tell you a lot about the different kinds of MRI machines, those who are nice inside with a nice screen and those who are too narrow. So I'm quite an expert after, I think, 120 hours in an MRI machine. But anyway, hanging on with wonderful neuroscientists and psychologists and clinicians, and participating in the research, and then maybe we'll talk about the methodology, how we really work as collaborators to co-design the experiment. Because how do you study meditation? You know, you bring someone and you say, can you meditate? Of course, it's much more complex than that. And so, basically, how did it come about? So first of all, the Dalai Lama over the years, first he had a keen interest in science, you know. He did something quite remarkable when he was 12 years old. He was given an astronomical sort of, what do you call it? Not the telescope with the mirror, but the sort of the big, what do you call it? Lunette astronomique, I don't know the... Well, telescope, but there's two kinds of telescope. Anyway, that one, which you just look through without the big mirror. Anyway, so he looked at the moon, and the moon, according to Buddhist text, is supposed to be made of crystal and shining by itself. He saw some shadows on the moon. So I forgot if it's Copernicus or Ptolemy who did the same observation and concluded that there was mountains on the moon. So he didn't know that, of course, and he told his teacher, it can't be, because there are shadows on the moon, and there should be mountains. So you could see that he had a keen investigating mind. So when he came out, not by his own will, but somehow sort of escaped the communist invasion of Tibet, and he said, well, at least it could be a good opportunity to meet with the world. And one of his keen interests was to meet with scientists. So he met with great scientists of the time, and he had a teacher in quantum physics, Friedrich von Weizsäcker, and he said he was a fantastic teacher and he was a very bad student. But then in the 1987, Francisco Varela, who was a remarkable Chilean neuroscientist, and I just come from Chile, and there was a symposium in honor of Francisco. He was working with Maturana and others. And he then moved to Harvard and finished his career in Paris, and he was a great philosopher of mind. He is the one who showed that when you see some image, the different periods of synchronization, desynchronization, again synchronization, when you see something, then identify something, anyway. And he was very, very interested in meditation as himself a Buddhist practitioner. So his dream was to do high-level research with serious scientists and serious meditators. So then with the American lawyer who had the same sort of, was fascinated by the fact that the Dalai Lama was so keen on science, they thought, let's do a small institute, which now is known as the Mind and Life Institute, just to facilitate those meetings, to make sure that if the Dalai Lama met with scientists, they were really good scientists that he could learn. And then those meetings start taking place every year or every 18 months. And in the beginning, it was more like offering the best tutorial to the Dalai Lama. But very soon, it occurred that the Dalai Lama has such an inquisitive mind that, and of course his persona is so fascinating and inspiring, that those 5 days of continuous talk, that usually the main events of Mind and Life takes, were mutually so enriching that many of those scientists say still now that it really changed afterwards their worldview and the way they approach science and things like that. I mean, for instance, Paul Ekman, who some of you might know, one of the world specialists on emotion, he joined the first Mind and Life where I came in year 2000 on destructive emotion. The reason why he came is because his daughter was dying to see the Dalai Lama. So he accepted, but he thought, it's just a nice holiday, no big deal. Well, after those 5 days, he said to the Dalai Lama, he was writing his book, Emotion Revealed, which is a popular book, but summarizing his 30 years of research. And he said, I will have to change 5 chapters of my book after spending this week here. And at one point, at the tea break, he came to the Dalai Lama because his daughter was so much, that was the whole point. And so the Dalai Lama, as he often does, took their hand while they were speaking. And Paul said, I never thought that goodness could be palpable. So it was also a life-changing experience. And many of the scientists had the same feeling, were inspired. So anyway, in 2000, when we were doing this meeting on the destructive emotion, there was Francisco Varela, Richard Davidson, Paul Ekman, many others. Halfway through those 5 days, the Dalai Lama said one morning, So this is one of those meetings here with Richard Davidson. He said, it's all fine what we discuss, but what can we contribute to society? So we had a brainstorming at lunchtime, and we said, well, let's really, there was a few things already done in terms of research, but not much. Let's start a real good program of research with the different labs that are present here. And so that's how it started. And then I was there presenting the Buddhist view on emotions. And so when they say, oh, we want to start and we need some guinea pigs because I had a little past in science, I just carelessly raised my hand and said, oh, I will come. And then I didn't know it was the beginning of, as I said, flying guinea pig, going all over the MRIs of Europe and North America and Hong Kong and everywhere you can think of. But so that began the idea. So this is Wolf Singer, the person who first found the gamma frequencies of waves in the brain. And so what was the idea? Well, again, the Dalai Lama says in Buddhism there are three parts. There's Buddhist science, it's an investigation of reality, empirical investigation. So then we can talk on the same platform. Then there is Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist practice of spirituality or religion, and he said that's Buddhist business. So, but Buddhist science, we can talk, we can collaborate because it's about investigating nature of consciousness, of mind, of reality, of physical reality, and so forth. So that started, and we thought, well, meditation has been going on for 2,500 years. There's hundreds of treatises about meditation in the Buddhist practice. So how can we collaborate? There was a few things at the time, someone called Andrew Newberg, maybe he was quite in the newspaper. He was putting people in a PET scan or something like that, and ask him to pray or meditate for 45 minutes, and when they feel high, they push a button. Try to do science like that. So, obviously, we needed to find a protocol. So how do we do? Well, basically, as you all know, because most of you being scientists, you need to compare things. In MRI, you don't measure absolute values of what's going on in the brain. You have to compare with another state. So a resting state where a meditator just lie there or if it's EEG, sits there, basically doing nothing. And then a meditation state where he engaged or she engaged in that meditation. And then, of course, meditation is such a generic name for mind training. So it all depends in what you train. Attention, focus attention, compassion, or some kind of open presence of mindfulness. This is completely different, and those will have completely different signature in the brain. So then the question was, well, with EEG, you can have long span of recording, but with MRI, because of technical constraint, if we had taken for 20 minutes to get into a state, it would not have been easy to study. Fortunately, it turned out that if we do 45 seconds of resting state and 1.5 minutes or 1 minute of engaging, say, in compassion meditation, well, that was to be found, but it works. It means that within 10-15 seconds, the meditator can generate very powerfully that state of mind, quite cleanly, basically to its optimal level according to his or her capacities. And when it comes to drop it, usually you can drop it almost instantly. So that was basically luck, that this flexibility from the practitioner side was there. Otherwise, the fMRI study would have been very difficult to conduct. So then we could do things like alternate 10, 20, 30 blocks and do variants, and if we do different kinds of meditation, permutate them. So then you could do a very good protocol, and then if it works, you could bring 15 subjects, have 15 controls, so then science was proceeding well. So the idea, obviously, was to first study people who had a great experience in meditation, who had between 10 to 50,000 hours of practice, because if we start, let's go for where you can see the strongest effect. If we don't find anything in people who have done 50,000 hours, either they just fool themselves thinking something was changing in them, or simply which would have been true 20 years ago, the technology was not there to be able to detect those changes. So it came at a time where EEG became more refined, where fMRI would become more available. So then that perfect conjecture made that we could study those long-term meditators. And of course, that was a preliminary to then study starting from scratch. Someone who has never meditated, and you make 2 groups, and you see if they do 4 weeks of meditation, what does that change? So you could start some kind of effect on randomly selected people, volunteers, or you could have also begin a longitudinal study. So all these become a very vibrant field of research. We call it contemplative neuroscience or contemplative psychology. And we had a few great meetings in Denver with 1,000 people came, kind of symposium. So that was the Dalai Lama is always very engaged with those discussions. So those meditators who I'm talking about first came from those wonderful places where they usually spend their life. So that was also my job, to convince them to go to the labs. And this is a perfect meditation place. You can be sure no one is going to come to disturb you. There's no supermarket, no movie hall. All you can do is meditate, otherwise you simply don't stay there. And so that's a kind of lake in Bhutan. That's another place in Tibet. And that's what I'm very fortunate to see every morning at breakfast, provided the weather is fine, from my hermitage in the Himalayas. And over my life, I spent 5 solid years in solitary retreats, trying my best not to fall asleep and to practice. So now, there were great luminaries in the Tibetan world. This is Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. I spent 13 years with him. He was also a teacher to the Dalai Lama himself. So they are no more alive. But even the great master was alive. You don't want to say, please come in MRI machine and all that. That doesn't seem quite appropriate. Just you would not use also the Dalai Lama as a guinea pig. So he and Kangyu Rinpoche, the great Lama to whom this foundation, which my coming to Portugal is dedicated, it is mostly their students. There's also women great practitioner. And I just want right now to dispel the idea we speak, Tibetan monks meditation, do fantastic things. Now, at the stage of, after 12 years of those studies, there were equal number of subjects among the long-term meditators who are men and women, lay practitioners as well as monastics. So it is, and also East and West practitioners, because there are people in Europe and the USA who have done extensive retreats. So it's not culturally biased, gender biased. It's simply that in the beginning, there was a bunch of monks like me, but later this bias was corrected. So this is a remarkable woman who was a great meditator as well. So then you move with 126 electrodes. So as you know, the 2 ways that was being used for meditation mostly were EEG, where you have a wonderful temporal resolution. You can measure very fast changes at the millisecond. But as you know, it's more difficult, although now there's some progress, but to make a precise 3-dimensional location within the brain, it is not as precise, of course, as MRI. And so the number of subjects came to do that, and the next one, of course, is MRI machine. Unfortunately, you cannot meditate in this position. So this Lama, who is Mingyur Rinpoche, who wrote a beautiful book called The Joy of Meditation, The Joy of Living, sorry, and there's, I think, a second one called The Joy of Meditation. And he says that MRI has 4 characteristics. It is dark, it is narrow, it is cold, and it is noisy. And I would add that you have to lie down flat on your back after a 12-hour jet lag, so the main thing is not to fall asleep. Nevertheless, we managed to spend a lot of time in MRI machine. This is the very first time I spent 2.5 hours non-stop at Richard Davidson's lab. Why I spent so much time is because the Dalai Lama was coming 10 days later, and we really wanted to have the first kind of result to present him. So there was a sort of a day and night activity. So that's Richard Davidson in Madison, Wisconsin, at the Weissman Brain Imaging Center. So then, following that, we did the first paper, and Richard Davidson and Antoine Lutz wanted me to be part of it, just to show, not that I really did a lot except sitting in the MRI machine and talking with them, but to show that it was not just a guinea pig, it was really try to think together. I remember very well when we started doing, the timing and how we alternate different kinds of meditation. It was really like beta testing. We had a mic, and I would say, well, this is too short, or I could do it shorter. We were adjusting everything. And then we were also discussing the result. What does it mean? Why, for instance, to give you just a quick example, when you engage in compassion meditation, how comes the premotor areas are activated? And I thought, well, because what is compassion? There's a state of readiness to engage in action to help others. So this kind of discussion, and I will tell you one later about how we manage to distinguish empathy from compassion, comes from this interaction between the first person experience that is now being taken seriously and the third person perspective, which is now how do you look at the brain and the physiology from outside. And now there's a school, especially in France and in the US, called the second person perspective, which is very detailed and extensive interviews, not just feeling how did you feel in MRI, and so forth, but very detailed interview from the phenomenological perspective. So those three really complete each other to give a whole picture of this interaction. So anyway, this first paper was shown that when experienced meditators, I was the first guinea pig, but 15 others came when we saw that something was happening there, is that there was a very intense activation in the gamma frequency when those meditators engage in unconditional loving kindness and compassion meditation. It was so instant that when Wolf Singer saw that first, he's the one who found put the gamma frequency, said that this must be an artifact. It could be muscle. Maybe the meditators do like this, when they engage in compassion, or they do like this. So anyway, there was a lot of discussions and controls, and it took a year before basically being sure that this was really the effect of meditation. And you can see a control group here. That means people to whom we just gave the instruction what it is to fill your mind with loving kindness for a week. Then they came to the lab, and they did the same procedure of neutral state, engaged in compassion 50 times, and then that's EEG, of course. And then you see the neutral state, nothing happened. At the level of threshold that we measure, nothing happens also in meditation. Well, they have not trained. But if you look at the subjects, the trained meditators at rest, nothing much happened. When they engage in that compassion meditation, there's this huge peak in gamma frequency. It was very, very large, and unusually large, so that was suspicious for a while. We thought it was muscle, but recently, Richard Davidson and Giulio Tononi at the sleep lab, they could show for the very first time that with meditators, you see gamma frequency going on through deep sleep, which was unheard of before. So if those meditators do compassion meditation for half an hour before going to sleep, the gamma goes on. So this is no muscle activity. So now this is part of the paper of 2003. You can see the average intensity of gamma in 10 controls, and then in practitioner. So as you can see, this is quite significantly different. And then even at the level of the raw signal, you could see when they move to compassion meditation, even without going all this elaborate analysis of the data, the very raw signal was obviously different in meditators when they engage in that meditation. And then there was meditators of all ages. Some of them were quite young, yet they had done up to 6 years of contemplative retreat, so they had already, say, like 40,000 hours. Some were elder, but had done less. So the idea was, is there anything to do with age or with the numbers of hours of practice? So what was nice is that the intensity of the gamma activation was really matching with the how much did you train, which is so it's really a training effect, which is kind of what you expect. And then, this is just an image of MRI. This again is loving kindness meditation. Meditators at rest and in meditation, and then the control group at rest, nothing happened. In meditation, nothing happens either. That's normal, they have not been trained. So now, there was also Richard Davidson many years ago. He did studies comparing the activation of the right and the left prefrontal cortex activity with EEG. And he found that people who have mostly positive affects, they're quite happy with whatever happens, even their difficult circumstances, they keep sort of their optimism and their sort of eagerness to go about. And those are very active on the left prefrontal cortex. The balance is shifted. And those who are more active on the right prefrontal cortex, usually people who are quite ruminating all the time, sadness, episode of depression, sometimes chain smokers and a lot of personal difficulties in their lives. So you could almost, predict by looking at this, what kind of roughly psychological type those people would be. And when Richie first invited, a long-term practitioner in the lab and measured that, he was just 3 standard deviation outside the curve towards the positive effect. He was not even in the bell curve with 150 people. So a lot of those things were encouraging when we started this research, because it showed that definitely there was something there. It was worth exploring further. So then I went, and I still collaborating a lot with Tanya Singer. She's the daughter of Wolf Singer. She's a professor now at the Max Planck Institute of Leipzig in the Department of Affective Neurosciences. And she's really one of the world's specialists on empathy. So I went to the lab, and this time we collaborated with the Maastricht lab, where they are a technique of real-time fMRI. I mean, you could see when you have a target area, in the case of the empathy would be like the insula, and then when you engage in activating, say, loving kindness or empathy, and you would see within 3 seconds kind of a level on the screen, and you could try to monitor that up and down. So we did that. That was working fine. But we also did, without the feedback, simply asking in the 3 different kinds of meditation related with compassion. One is unconditional compassion. Yeah, you feel that your mind is filled with compassion for all sentient beings, not having a special person in mind. The other one is loving kindness, but this time is with someone, like you think of a child and you feel with love for that child, and then compassion for someone who is suffering. And so then those 3 different states. And then we were asked, can you modulate, like a joystick, the intensity of compassion? So what does that mean, 30% of compassion? Does it mean that I look at someone and say, I don't like too much this guy, and I can only offer him 30% of my wonderful compassion? Well, it's not that. But if you think of an emotion, of a mental state, at some point it's coming, it's there, but it's not very intense. It's just there, sort of taking birth, and then it's stronger, and then it's the sort of the highest amplitude that you can experience at the time with your capacities. So a meditator, basically what he or she does is to generate compassion. It comes and grows and grows. So can you monitor it? Well, usually we don't do that. But if we are asked to do, it seems, and that was 22 hours in MRI in 3 days. It turns out that, when they say 30%, they keep on jumping. Can you do 30% of this, 90%, and go back after, after 30 seconds, go back to 90, to 60, to 0, to 90, so all possible combinations. And you do that a lot for 2 days. So the fact is, when we measure and compare with what you're supposed to do, your subjective state of 30, 60, and 90%, it maps, as you can see, pretty well. So that was for something that we are familiar with and we have been trained to do. But now, is that transferable to something else? So Tanya said, could you do disgust, for instance? So I don't meditate on disgust usually. So I won't tell you what I was meditating upon. It was like falling into a really bad place. But it worked perfectly well, and we could modulate in the same way. Then we even thought of something weirder. Can you imagine or visualize physical pain? And it turns out that, before that, I had been to the lab in US where we did real pain study with burning sort of sensation. So instead of just remembering this relatively, okay pain, which is like up to 50 Celsius, I was thinking of, being iron on my arm, but since I had gone to that, there was a sense, a memory of that. So I did try to generate the feeling of physical pain without having physical pain. And it turns out that it worked quite well. And also this 30, 60, 90%, and it has activated, this is the anterior singular cortex, and this, what is it, sensory? It's something with the sensory, I forgot the name, but it's one of those where it's really to do with the sensation of pain. Sorry, that's why I'm not a neuroscientist. But in any case, the network of pain was actually activated, although there was just imagine, and you could do this modulation. So it shows that something that we never do, it could be transferable because you simply had a flexible mind that you could use for anything you wanted. So now we came to this. So when I was doing that with Tanya Singer, at some point, because she's the world specialist on empathy, she said, no, please do what you want, what you do usually with compassion. And I said, well, so we did some session, and then after some time, so we don't need to look at that anymore. After some time, we were just testing the whole thing, and we have the real-time fMRI, so she could see the region that normally are activated, like an interior insula and all that. She said, but what are you doing? This is nothing we see normally with empathy. So let's talk. So we stopped doing the measurement and we talked. And they said, well, I'm doing unconditional loving kindness and compassion. But she said, how is it different? So then she explained me more what she meant by empathy, which is a word that is overused in our days. Everybody speaks of empathy all over the place. But really, empathy, it has two kinds. One is affective resonance. If you are happy and smile, somehow I feel happy. It's not emotional contagion, which is just if someone is very nervous, you feel nervous, but you don't know because it is because of the other person. You are not aware of that. It just makes you nervous. But empathy, you know that you suffer, for instance, because the other person is suffering. And Tanya has shown in her studies that actually the area of suffering are really activated. So it is really true suffering triggered by the fact of resonating with someone who is suffering. So that's affective resonance. Affective resonance, which is affective empathy. Now, cognitive empathy is of two kinds. Either you think, oh, what is that person feeling now? Like someone who is terrified of airplanes. You don't feel terrified, but you can imagine what she feels. And then be kind with that person. Or you could see what I would feel if I was the guy on this tightrope, and what I will feel, and you will feel much more terrified than he is, in fact, because he's quite a master of that. So those meant to let us know what the other people feel, what is their experience, and that's crucial for emotional intelligence for human relations. But now, here's the problem. If you are, say, a doctor, a nurse, or a social worker, and you have this natural propensity to highly resonate with others emotionally, then, your patient, either the person cure or die, basically, not suffer for 20 years, but if day after day after day after day, you suffer of the suffering of the others, this becomes quickly unbearable. So we call that the burnout. And 60% of all medical personnel in the United States will suffer of burnout during their career. It's a major problem. It is called emotional exhaustion, it's called burnout, and it used to be called compassion fatigue. So the recommendation is keep your distance. You have to be safe. You have to manage your emotions. You cannot do that, otherwise you will be burned out. So then distancing yourself is not so good because you can become cold, indifferent. So is there a better way? So then Tanya said, well, can you try to do just empathy? I said, okay, let's try. So I tried to visualize terrible sufferings, which I had seen in my life. I run humanitarian projects in Tibet. We were just coming back from an earthquake area where we tried to help. I had plenty to visualize. And just doing that, no compassion. After 1 hour of doing these blocks, I was completely drained emotionally. I had a complete burnout. So it was the end of the morning, and Tanya said, well, to the mic, we could stop for lunch. You have been there already for more than 1 hour. Or would you like to go to the compassion meditation? I said, please let me continue because this has become unbearable. I have to do something about that. So then I moved to this loving kindness, sort of warm feeling meditation, and it was completely different, very, very different. Like more embracing the suffering, no kind of this distress, much more present actually with the person who suffers in my mind. It was all, of course, all visualized. And in the brain was very different. So then we thought, well, that's something very interesting because if loving kindness could be the antidote to empathic distress, imagine the repercussions it could have in the medical world. So then I managed to convince 15 long-term meditators to go to the lab. And then Tanya did also a study with 30 volunteers just for a short period of time, complete novices. And what they found is that definitely the areas of the brain involved with empathy and with compassion are quite different. So I'm not going to go in detail, but there's all this ventral striatum, which has to do with more like sense of affiliation and I think reward, and insula, which is empathy, and I think this is what is it again? I forgot. The orbital frontal cortex and the mid, what is it? MCC? Mid cerebral cortex and so forth. So anyway, you can see the patterns between empathy and compassion are very different. But the main thing is it is a very different subjective feeling and a very different in the brain. Not only that, but we also did, we work with real pain. And then there is somebody else, you see the hand at the end of the MRI, who's sometimes getting electric shock, sometimes you get it. And so Tanya, before I did a lot of studies of how, for instance, couples or parents or good friends, how they relate when other person gets the suffering, how the empathy comes in the brain. So with empathy, and that was normal results. When we deal with compassion, the interesting thing is that we are very concerned with the other person, but when you get the pain, you feel it much less. I think the fact of having this loving kindness to the others, I don't like the word anesthetic, which she used, but it's a different perception of pain, because you think, well, this time, suppose it's my dear mother, who is at the other hand, if she doesn't get, and I'm getting it, and I'm full of love, like a mother gets the pain instead of her child, she's happy about that. I mean, it's like taking the pain that your child could get, taking yourself, there's a kind of appreciation that your child is not in pain. So it turns out that the pain was about 50% less unpleasant, and that shows also in the brain. So those results are not published yet, but it's fascinating interaction between empathy and compassion. Now this was done at Richard Davidson's lab by Antoine Lutz and others, where we did in MRI, seeing the pain coming, and then there's different strategy where you may not feel a pain. You could be distracted. You could have something anesthetic that you don't feel the pain. But usually when you feel the full intensity, you also feel the full unpleasantness of the pain. What was interesting with meditators, compared to novices here in blue, is that they do feel, and this is focused attention meditation, and this is open presence meditation, so that's a more mysterious term, and that's the one that works the best. Open presence is a state, focused attention, you focus on the pain a lot. You concentrate on the pain itself with mindfulness. Open presence, as it says, making your mind very vast, like a big space. And then things happen, pain, noise, things, but it's like, it's like if you have a firecracker in a small pot, it's a big thing. Firecracker in a big open space, no big deal. So likewise, the spaciousness makes that you don't react emotionally so strongly. This is a state that works very well for several kinds of challenges from outside. And I will come back to the startle, the attentional blink. In that case, that stage when the pain comes, it's just something among many other things. So you are not so disturbed. You are not apprehensive of the pain. There's no aftershocks after the pain. But you do perceive the full intensity because you don't try to stop anything. It's very clear, very intense, but the unpleasantness is almost gone. And you can see that both in the subjective report and in the brain. So you see so many of those ways of influencing the sensory input, the emotional response, and things like that. Now this is a classical study on sustained vigilance. So this is about 10 minutes, but we did it for 45 minutes. So some of you know this continuous performance task. You see a small number on the screen. They're very fast. They're changing every 3 or 4 per second. Each time it's a 0. It's a small number. You push a button. So in the beginning, you perform quite well. After 10 minutes, people start making mistakes. You push a button for the 8. You forgot to push it when it's 0. With long-term practitioners, flat. We had 3 out of 10, 45 minutes, that's 1,000 very fast response. 100%, 0 mistake. And one of them, this one, at the end of 45 minutes, he said, "What's the problem?" He was ready to continue. Actually, first I took a laptop to the Hermitage where he was in Nepal, our retreat center, and I said, "You train with 15 minutes, and then you do the 45 minutes." He did both. So that means he did 1 hour, and still he was a perfect score. And he found this not difficult at all. There was another study by Antoine Lutz showing that if you look at that, and if you look at the brain activation, I don't have the data here, the networks of attention. With beginners, they don't perform well, but they activate quite strongly their network because they try very hard. The mid-term practitioners, say they do 5,000 hours, they do quite well, but they still have to activate strongly that area. The long-term practitioner, they do perfectly well, but the activation of the attention network is relatively small. That means it's like when you really master a skill, you don't have to make so much effort. You are in a kind of flow of perfect attention. Like a pianist, he doesn't have to think of the finger movement, he just plays. A skier, I remember a champion saying when she won the downhill, she said, "I felt like a river." So the ease, you do something well with ease. So that shows that they didn't have to recruit so hard the attention network to have a perfect score. So another thing we did, and that was Jonathan Cohen first in Princeton, but they didn't publish the result because all the researchers went away to some other labs. But still was very fascinating. The attentional blink, if you present 20 images, I think it's in a second, and then you have all kinds of images, and there is one time there is an image of a vehicle, like a train or an aeroplane, and then there is an animal, tiger, elephant. If you ask people, look for a vehicle, and then you ask them, did you see it? They said, yes, I saw an aeroplane. And then you ask them, did you see an animal? So if the aeroplane is here, and the animal image is presented just after, they don't see it. It's like a blink. You know, when you blink, you don't see. So it's attentional blink. Why? Because the attention gets stuck. Aeroplane, you know, I have to go there. You think aeroplane, your attention sticks to that, and it takes some time to sort of unstick to be available again. So they will see the elephant or the tiger if it's 4 or 5 or 6, depending on people, after. So this is called attentional blink. So the idea, will meditation change something? So yes, it does, and in a big way. First, I will do a small test of attentional blink with numbers. So I request you to carefully watch this X and see, look carefully what you see, okay? And there will be a number. So try to identify that number. Okay, ready? So did you see a 3? So who saw then another number? 7. Very good. I think it was not fast enough. Usually you don't see the second one. So now, but still, so here are normal people. So that means they don't see the second image if the second one is presented within 440 milliseconds. And then they start seeing it, and then they see it all the time. You see, with average number of 4 meditators, they start 70% see it right from the next image. And there was one guy, he was 65 years old. That shows that, you know, age didn't impair. He was 100%. He never missed any image, even is presented right after. It's kind of a mystery of attention. So then came another thing I did with Paul Ekman and Richard Levinson. Again, sort of flying guinea pig. You know, there is a very strong reflex called the startle. You know, if there's a boom somewhere, because you need your attention to be focused on something that could be dangerous. You know, if some bomb or the ceiling start to cramp, or the elephant is coming, or whatever, you need to be aware. So you jump. And what does that mean? It's basically you need to be there now. And if you have been in your mind somewhere else, you need to be back right here. So that's called the startle. It's very instinctive. It has to be so fast because you should not think. It should be very fast. Like you see a snake, you jump, you don't have to think twice. So it's very primitive, very instinctive, therefore very hard to control. In fact, when you do in the lab, if you ask people to try to block, and there's a strong detonation, and in the film I'm going to show it's not that strong, but in fact it's like 2 gunshots here. It's really big, I tell you. So then you jump, and it's hard, and if you ask them to control, they jump even more. So we did that, and you have all the sensors, you know, sedation, heartbeat, and then they film your facial expression to see what happens. So that was kind of neat, because then I thought, well, you know, there is kind of a prediction from the meditator's side, and that's why the interaction is interesting. I thought, well, focused attention, that will not do. One, this open presence should make a difference, because your mind is so vast. So I was thinking, well, an explosion, no big deal, will come sometime, you know. Just sit there, very open. So that worked, actually. I'll show you the difference. And I'll tell you why, then how did we interpret that, which is also interesting. So first, the result. This is in open presence, focused attention, and when I was myself inducing some distraction, thinking I was driving a car in Tibet going to see our humanitarian projects. So you see the general response was much higher when I was distracting myself and less in open presence. Similar for facial expression. And then the heart variability was absolutely not affected by the loud explosion in open presence. So now I'll show you the movie. Where is it? Sorry for that. Oops. Okay, here. Oh no. Okay. It's coming. So first there is some, they did thousands of tests and people always jump.
Oh, geez.
So this is Paul Ekman watching them. So it doesn't seem loud, but this is really loud. I mean, after 10 of those, you really start to feel tired. You notice there's this kind of relief afterwards. It was the same sound, huh? So it's not just a small. So she's hyper-reactive, of course. You have to wait for 5 minutes. It's come completely unexpectedly. So okay, not too bad. I start liking it after a while. Okay. So then I have to go fast because we need to talk together. But then the idea, let's move to short-term meditation, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 20 minutes a day, and see what happens. So now there's a flurry of studies, especially in the clinical world. Last year, there was 400 publications just about the MBSR, only that, mindfulness-based stress reduction and clinical application. There was only 5 a year in 2000. Now there's so many different studies. This is a study done by Britta Hotzel and Sarah Lazar's work in Boston about structural change in the hippocampus just after 4 weeks of mindfulness meditation. And you can see, compared to the control group, that the hippocampus is already changed structurally after 4 weeks. That's not very much. Here's another study of 2 weeks. This was done by Ellen Wang at Richard Davidson's lab. 2 weeks of compassion, and you look first to the prosocial behavior, and there are different tests and prosocial games and real-life situation compared to psychological reappraisal, which is a well-known techniques of, to deal with circumstances. But what was interesting, if you look at the size of the amygdala after 2 weeks, you could predict back by looking at the decrease of the amygdala, shrinking of the amygdala, looking at the data of the amygdala, you could predict how intense the prosocial behavior would be. So you could do a reverse prediction by just looking at the structural change of the amygdala. So that's really is quite remarkable. And this another one of the first study, of short-term meditation that was 3 months, 20 minutes a day, in employees of a biotech company in Madison, and they showed that how first the anxiety was reduced compared to the control group, and how their antibodies were much stronger after this, when they get influenza virus compared to the control group. Then we did a study in Nepal, just measuring cortisol with meditators compared to a control group of people living around in similar environment. And you can see that at awakening, different times of the day, the cortisol is much less, that means much less stress in those that in the control group. So that's quite significant. Linda Carson in Calgary. She measured, again, 4 weeks, I think 4 or 8 weeks, I can't remember, of mindfulness stress reduction, and see the impact on just sort of character reaction, like anger traits. And so you see how it diminishes. The control group was interesting because people said, well, you take a break, 20 minutes of meditation, any break will do. You have a busy life. So she said, well, let's do a manual work, pottery. It's good, you take a 20 minutes break to do pottery. So it may work just as well. Well, it certainly works to make pots, but not to reduce anger. So likewise, anxiety was reduced more by meditation. She then measured blood pressure. So in normal people, for good reason, it doesn't decrease it. But if you have elevated blood pressure, it reduced quite significantly compared to a control group without the MBSR. So now there's so many studies. Here is a study on inflammatory response done with compassion meditation at Emory University and by Chuck Risen and Pace. So it shows that in the high practice, this is all again novice volunteers for a few weeks, those who did the most practice, this were the highest reduction of interleukin, which has to do with the inflammatory response. Then there was this 3-month study of meditation. That was not just 20 minutes, but quite a retreat, but just for 3 months with people who had never done retreat. So that's Cliff Saron at UC Davis. There was a whole team of scientists. After 2 years, they're still analyzing. They have so many data. But one interesting data that they published was that the retreat group, after 3 months, had increased activity of telomerase. As you know, it is the enzyme that protects the telomere, which are at the end of the chromosome, this single-stranded DNA. And when as much as the telomeres shrink, it is an indicator of aging, and at some point the cell sort of degenerate or stop replicating. So it has been shown that if you have a highly stressed life, the telomeres shrink quicker, and so it is connected with aging. So this is quite an interesting indication. Then recently, I've been always interested, and I sort of pushed a little bit that agenda because I met through Mind and Life Michael Minnie, who is an epigeneticist, who found in rats, for instance, a very stressed line of rats, if for the 10 first days of their life, they are put together with over-caring mothers who are grooming, licking the rats all the time, there's a methylation and histone change that sort of suppress the genes that will make them very stressed and fearful. And those rats are quite normal, and that's a long-lasting effect. So that's epigenetic effect, of course, as you know. So since it was about maternal love and stress, we thought, well, meditation should do something. So Perla Kaliman, which is at Madrid, she's an epigeneticist, worked with Richie Davidson, and this is a very expensive experiment. That means Richie said that, and the meditators, after 8 hours only, there is a strong effect of expression, epigenetic effect, only 8 hours. So all these factors see that, it changes on many levels, at the functional level of the brain, structural level of the brain, epigenetics. There's even something that we did with Doris Taylor showing that maybe increase of stem cell in the blood flow, all kinds of wonderful possibilities of research. And now we say, why not going in a secular way with all those techniques in schools? So again, in Madison, they went into elementary school. And they did an 8-week program with mindfulness, then loving kindness, gratitude. There's the breathing, where you're mindful of your breathing. Then you do gesture of gratitude. You plant the seed of friendship. You do all kinds of activities, 30 days, 30 minutes, 3 times a week. No big deal. The kids love it. So then, after 8 weeks, you look at the prosocial behavior of that intervention group, and it's so much better than the other group that was just a control group. But is it real? Is it just the subjective perception of the teachers? So then came the real ultimate science, the stickers test. That's really good science. What do? You determine before the intervention for each child who is their best friend. in the class, and who is their less favorite child, the child they cannot stand, basically. And then you give them 4 envelopes with the photo of their best friend, their least favorite child, an unknown child, and a sick child. And you give them number of stickers, and you say you have to give them away, put them in the envelope, anything you like. As you can guess, before the intervention, they give everything to their best friend. So you say, well, they are 4 years old, 5 years old, what's going to do? Any difference? Well, the difference is really drastic. After 8 weeks, they give basically the same number to their best friend and their least favorite friend. I mean, you are completely level down discrimination. So remarkable that now the city of Madison has given 10 schools to extend that study. And the idea was, of course, we could extend it even further. So once the Dalai Lama was there and Richie was explaining the result, and he said, well, 100 school, 1,000 school, you go to the UN and worldwide. So let's see. So, now, you get a cover of Time magazine 10 years ago about the first work. You would see a beautiful blonde lady levitating over a beach. That was the idea of Time magazine about meditation. Now it has changed. Meditation is now taken seriously as a solid mind training. So I think now we are, doing good science with full of enthusiasm. And so I'm very happy that in my sort of disorderly and chaotic way and not really being a specialist, I could share some of those data. And I have a last image, that's the monk escaping from the lab. And it's not Photoshop, it's a real photo. There are 7 monks. Okay, thank you so much. So long, but so I thought to share a few data.
Well, Matthieu, thank you very much. Extremely interesting, and if you were not wearing robes, I would have thought that you were back to your PhD
I see.
Studies prior to, in terms of the richness of the data that was presented, and of course the antidote worked very, very, very well. So we definitely have a significant amount of scientific data and evidence to discuss, and I would like to start by asking Professor Castro Caldas an initial commentary on this result.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, for inviting me to be here, and second, for this lesson. It was very fantastic to listen your results, and because it's we see this in the literature, but seeing the real thing, it's a different thing. Maybe I would like to pick up one of the aspects of the literature. In the beginning of this century, it was described in the rest situation, a concept that is called the default mode network. That means when people was inside the machine and were told to rest, of course no one is resting.
Yes.
So what's rest?
Yes.
And then there was some activation, and there was a changing in the paradigm. But sometimes there was a decrease of activity. So default mode network is something that the brain is doing when we think it's doing nothing.
Yes.
But the connectivity of this network is apparently very important, and it concerns lots of areas of the brain. Mainly inside the temporal lobe and maybe the posterior cingulate cortex and some of these areas. And apparently, this network is very important because the activity represents something like more 5% of energy.
How
only 5% of the energy, the activity. So the change between rest situation and activity is only 5% of energy of the brain. So the important thing is this network.
Yes.
And apparently, it's in the meditators what is different.
Yes.
It's the multiple connections in this area that apparently is different.
Yes.
So the important thing, and maybe the most enthusiastic result for this, is that this changes the normal activity in daily life.
Yes, of course.
So because you have a starting point that is completely different.
Yes.
So it changes when you activate, and you have different solutions.
So that's a very wonderful question. I mean, Americans always say that. I'm not American, but this is truly a wonderful question. because we were first confronted with that question to define a neutral state. You know, people say resting state. And what Paul Ekman first said, you know, when those guys do, you tell them to rest, they just rest. So if you tell someone, just don't do anything, basically they ruminate or they are distracted. So then those two, supposed to be neutral state, were not neutral at all, because if you tell a meditator not to do anything, he sort of stays in a kind of, you know, very inactive state, but basically if you ask him to be bland, he will be bland. And the other people will just start being distracted, so which is different. So we had this problem to the extent that we thought, well, what can we do as a control? We could maybe read, when it was in EEG, we could maybe read the newspaper, because at least we'll do the same thing and not engage in compassion. So it was always a problem. Now, about the baseline and the resting state. First, the default mode, I mean, you spoke about connectivity. Now there are papers showing increased permanent connectivity, higher connectivity in meditators. That's one thing. The second thing is the emotional sort of baseline. I mean, so Paul Ekman calls that the platform to which you come back after the ups and downs. I mean, level of happiness, I mean, well-being, level of, I don't know, patience after, people have different degrees of patience, but you could still possibly get them a little bit nervous. So there is this high and down, but whether you come back here or whether you come back here, that's your platform in life. That makes a huge difference because that's your daily life. Now, from the perspective of the meditation, that's exactly what we aim to do. We said there's no point, having a wonderful, blissful, pleasant, detached meditation if few seconds later you're just as grumpy and as anything as always. So the whole point is the meditation should change what we call the post-meditation. And at some point they should even blend. That is hardly any difference. So that's the ideal goal. So now in terms of measuring that, actually there was for instance, in the gamma, the left prefrontal cortex, that was a default. I mean, there's people in the resting state. They don't do anything special. There's also some different gamma activity in those who do practice a lot this compassion meditation. The default mode is also higher. And when they do also several blocks, like for an hour, then they stay for quite a long time at their baseline from which they then activate keeps on increasing and stays after a while, which is we don't find in novices. So there was a slide which I didn't show. The increase of the baseline of gamma in meditators over 1 hour, while the novices, the baseline doesn't change. So these things are clearly in what you say, and I fully agree that what matters in the end is your baseline in life, emotional, attentional, everything you can develop as skills in meditation. The baseline is what matters. It's also useful to have resources to deal with strong perturbations. We did that also, having shrieking woman panic, or a laughing child, or terrible bad taste and good taste, and see how meditators are less unsettled by those. That's also like a good rider on the horse, if there's a bit bumpy ride, he will still stay on the horse. So things like that. But that's perfectly right. What we need is the long-term stability.
I was just going to catch up on one of your slides, and now what you've just answered to Professor Castro-Caldas regarding that gamma synchrony tests in long-term meditators, which was published in a high-impact journal, PNAS.
Yeah.
And I believe that you also mentioned in your presentation that they are now studying those long-term meditators sleeping,
Yes.
and they also find...
The paper is actually out. It's someone at Tononi's lab, and Antoine Luce is also part of that paper, and it shows that the problem of the muscle, a lot of people say, well, meditators, when they address, they are like this, when they engage in meditation, there's more tonus, the muscle also in the overlap with the gamma, so there was some criticism. And they could eliminate that because we also put electrodes here to measure the muscle activity and subtract those. So obviously, it was definitely not just muscle, but there was a small contamination. We even thought, because people have shown that if you are full anesthesia, you don't have gamma. So there was a guy in Australia that was putting people almost in complete anesthesia, but they're still conscious, and there was no gamma. So I was almost volunteering to do that. Fortunately, we didn't have to do that because the sleep was the answer. Because in deep sleep, you don't have gamma normally. But it turns out that if meditators, I think as a baseline, but also if you do, so I was whole day in the Richie's lab, night, and there was non-stop 24 hours, guinea pig. So go to the sleep lab, and then it turns out that yes, during the first period of deep sleep, you still see some gamma activity, which was never, I think reported before.
And I think that enters in another field, a very interesting field, is that if you have an analogy with slow wave sleep at the beginning, if this is something similar, how is REM sleep? How are the dreams of the meditators? Do they have different dreams?
So that's complicated again. So they are, now you heard, of course, about lucid dream is now practiced quite currently in psychology labs. This is something that Buddhist practitioners have been doing for 2,000 years. So they train first as lucid dream, but they go even further. I think some lucid dream people do it, is manufacture your dreams, make beautiful dreams, you travel wherever you want. And then at the end, almost find a state with very little dream. So that's, I think, not being found yet in psychology. So, well, that night I was at Tononi's lab. I don't have usually lucid dreams, I must confess. I'm not a very good practitioner. But I had just happened to have one. So I did report it, but so many subjects, so many analyses, so I don't know what they saw. But anyway, we have not studied that ourselves a lot with meditation. But there are labs doing that.
And maybe I am not going to monopolize, but just one last question is the concept of mirror neurons.
Okay.
Do you have any idea?
Well, Tanya Singer, she's empathy, really one of the leading. We sort of little bit not tired. No, I know many of the wonderful people of the mirror neurons field. We're a little bit okay. Stop telling us about those mirror neurons, because this is very, very basic, for motor thing. That's how they were found. But
you have that for language, for phonology.
But I think if you see the richness of the network, which is recruited for empathy, and then how it changed with compassion, this is much more complex. I think that mirror neurons certainly might play a role at some point. But I think the phenomena of empathy and loving kindness is much more complex and richer than this very, very basic, reacting. Like the monkey who sees the guy having his sandwich. So I think Tanya will say, okay, don't bring again those mirror neurons. It's overstated.
You very nicely showed us some examples of the effect on the brain of mental imagery, like the example of the pain,
Yes.
where you were experiencing, well, trying to experience the pain.
Well, you know, we didn't guess that it would happen because pain is really supposed to be very somatic.
Exactly, and yet you see a difference
Yeah.
in the fMRI, and there is data, I believe, also, and please correct me, and I think that there is data, for instance, of people who actually also do mental imagery with a motor activity, like trying
Yes,
to
yes.
enhance a motor activity,
Sure,
and in
sure.
fact,
Yeah, yeah.
it also
That's
shows
well known.
in the brain.
Yeah, another thing that was done recently is making micro blisters, and then see with meditation the size is about half than the control. So there's also this inflammation thing. Yeah.
And so there is certainly a lot of effects going on. So apparently there is a change in the structure. You show that.
Yes.
There is a change in the function, and in the brain. I mean, how would someone like João Relvas, who's a basic neuroscientist, would address these issues in a more or less biological pattern? How do you view these rich examples that were presented?
Okay, first of all, I want to thank the invitation and to be present, and thank you to a wonderful lecture. The first thing, before I answer your question, I was actually thinking about what happened when meditators stop meditating for a long time.
Yes.
Do they actually come back to a normal level of resting?
You know, meditation is a bit addictive.
Yes, I know. I think basically it's a hard experiment. But I mean, what will happen if a meditator...
So life is short, and I don't want to stop for 5 years just to see what happens.
But I think that probably would be actually from
Well,
the
you
experimental
would
point of view.
expect that it will go down to some extent, but some probably will. My guess is some will stay, because you know there's like some skills, you know, like bicycle. Now, I didn't ski for 20. I was born in the French Alps, so I was skiing when I was a very young kid, and I was not bad. So I didn't ski for 35 years. You know, in the Himalayas with monks' robes, you don't do skiing usually, and they don't have ski station. But then, you know, a few years ago, I started going to. I was asked. You know, they always want some clowns and jokers. I was invited several times at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I have a good friend nearby. She said, "Why don't you see if you can still ski?" So I started again, and it came back the third, fourth day, you know, basically. So there's something that you don't go. And I used to play some musical instrument, and still one of my hand, which is, I used to play the classical guitar, and the hand, this muscle is still much stronger than the other side after 40 years. So I guess, and also there's something with the mind that is, I think, probably even more different, is when you get a real emotional skill and you know, the faculty to deal with the events of life, perturbances, and keep your balance. Actually, it becomes almost a permanent sort of, as you said, you know, daily life meditation. So it's not that you don't need to practice a lot to start with. And I've always been very skeptical when people say, you know, I don't meditate, my job is my meditation. Well, you know, it's like you say, you know, I don't train on the marathon, you know, but you know, what I do all day long will be enough. And when you run the marathon, you see that you need a training. So I think you keep a potential when you have a good training, that then you actually exercise the skill, emotional skill, and the attention skill, and the sort of inner peace and serenity or freedom, whatever you call that with fancy names. That what state that you got through being extended period of practice, basically you keep on applying them in daily life. So it's not as if suddenly you are doing something so drastically different. So I believe that it's very important to keep regular practice. And if you see the example of the Dalai Lama, you know, he's the Dalai Lama, and now at 79, he still do 4 hours of practice every morning from 3 to 7. So you know, what should we do ourselves if he gives that kind of example? So, but I'm convinced, because I have a quite hectic life, that at least 3 months I try to keep every winter to go to my hermitage, helps me tremendously to deal with the more chaotic aspect. So about stopping altogether, I would say that if you stop because of you somehow completely change your worldview or say this is all crap, and your mind, and you start playing computer games all day long, or I don't know, do something terrible, like kind of negative activity, then you will build a reverse neuroplasticity towards something negative. But otherwise, I believe something will remain, and you keep on somehow exercising it without formally doing it. So, but this has not been studied. What we lack also is real longitudinal study about those long-term meditators, because there could be a process, obviously, of self-selection. I mean, those who have done 60,000 hours of meditation, I think this just happened to me because I was staying in those hermitages. I did that because I love it.
Of course.
So that means I have a temperament to do that. So who knows? I'm convinced that some of those, I don't have great qualities, but at least some of the fruit of that which I feel, I didn't enjoy that kind of fruit before. So I personally attribute that to the training. But the fact that I persevered means I sort of, it's in harmony with what I like. So there's a self-selection.
So you think that is probably an inherent bias in a way?
So we don't know, because nobody's going to volunteer for 50 years of meditation just for the sake of science. Even they hate it, So that will always be there. But so now, just to add one thing, one good thing that Tanya Singer is doing now, she got funds from the European Commission. She got a big grant to have 300 volunteers for 1 year to do, precisely to work with the burnout issue. They are doing now, it's almost at the end, affective empathy, cognitive empathy, affective compassion or loving kindness, and cognitive compassion. And then they have a control group with memory exercise. One of the first remarkable things is, if you work with volunteers, such a big number, after that long, 1 year, you get basically 30 to 40% drops out. People for many, they get fat. She has 6% dropout. And all for good reason. They have to move, or their mother was sick. People, they say, at the end, they are almost in tears because they love so much this, meditating 30 to 40 minutes a day, and the whole Saturday afternoon together for a whole year. And almost nobody dropped. And then the preliminary results are wonderful. It really shows that, what I mentioned as preliminary with that paper, that cultivating loving kindness really works as an antidote to burnout and this empathic distress.
It's also very interesting that there are apparently different areas of the brain actually for both empathy and compassion. So it's actually being differentiated.
That's right.
At the organic.
So here you will have for the first time a longitudinal study for 1 year with entirely novice people, randomly separated. So that's, I think, when the results are coming, that this is something that will be quite robust.
But that's a topic that probably we should come back to, which is really the methodology of these trials and what type of controls do you need in order to. But first, I would like to probably take the opportunity to ask João also, because you're in basic science. How do you view also the data that was presenting regarding the more biological questions around meditation, such as changing antibodies or changing in the immune system, cortisol changes, decrease in inflammatory cytokines such as IL-6. Well, and again, the aging data regarding longer telomeres. How does one put this into perspective? How does one study this?
I think basically it's quite well known that actually the mind states affect our immunity, affect our well-being in general.
But yet we have no idea how that process really happens. What are the biomarkers, the mediators downstream that lead to that type of phenomena? In fact, isn't it?
Exactly. We know a little bit about inflammatory cytokines, for instance, obsessive-compulsive patients, bipolar patients. They have actually increased inflammatory cytokines. It's quite well known for many years. We know quite a lot from the pathologists, human pathologists, that there are changes, profound changes in these mediators' information, etc. We know also from studies from neurofeedback, for instance, in a way, it's a little bit not like meditation, but use the same principles of teach self-regulation of brain activity, that you can increase and improve certain traits in terms of organic traits and also some of these parameters like inflammatory cytokines and things like that. So this is quite known. From your question, from a basic biologist, of course, I mean, fMRI, that actually is very good for topographical, you know, to see where actually the action is occurring, is an indirect proof in a way that we are measuring blood flow, okay, to these areas, but we are not measuring directly neuronal activity. So, of course, we are talking about human subjects. You know. From an experience point of view, well, it would be lovely to see basically if they do more synaptic connections, if they increase synaptic density in those areas that are being stimulated, etc. So that would be from the basic biology what I would do next. I mean, technologies are very invasive, of course. You know, you cannot really
you cannot take you cannot do biopsies.
Of course, it's unethical to do biopsies. But we have data actually from epigenetic patients, for instance. We have data from deep brain stimulation. We have data from long-term transmagnetic stimulation.
So you think that that type of technology could be applied to this cohort of people, you know, meditators at different stages of their practice throughout life, let's say, you know, early stage, medium stage,
yes.
Expert?
You mean deep brain stimulation, you mean the transmagnetic cranial?
Yeah, TMS, yes.
Well, then, you know, it's one of the things that I was ready to go to the, to the anesthesia, and Antoine Luce was really interested in trying that, to knock down the compassion area and see if we could still practice. And Richie and I said, no, my God, I'm not going to do that. And I thought, suppose I get stuck in the non-compassion state.
No, I'm not actually saying that one would subject, you know, meditators to this technology, but basically the principles. So one of the important things will be actually to see how actually through meditation we control different areas of the brain, specific areas of the brain, yes, because you are certain in you know, precise locations from your fMRI studies that connect these to moral behavior, to empathy, to etc. So TMS in our days have actually the capacity also to some extent to really to disturb or to focus in different areas of the brain. So I think there are some parallels in this kind of technology, and you know, so a wider, broader view of these things. We're using meditators, using people that can be cognitively enhanced by TMS, and also by deep brain stimulation, even that is not being used in the for cognitive enhancement. It's been used in diseases like Parkinson's, motor diseases, and also deep depression and things like that. They also, you know, the principle is the same. They are actually stimulating specific areas of the brain.
But that's kind of a bit invasive.
Yeah, of course.
So for those who may not know, the TMS is that you give a strong magnetic impulse, and you can sort of momentarily deactivate an area of the brain specifically.
Or you can, or activate.
Or opposite, but
you can
polarize. Sometimes you get a bit jittery when it's finished. And then the other one is sticking electrodes in your brain. So I'm ready to do quite a lot of things, but for time being, there's certain limits.
But it's been used as a therapy for
of course.
With,
now, it would be interesting to have a meditator who happens to need a certain intervention for, I don't know, epilepsy or Parkinson, and see somehow if you could study something else at the same time.
Yeah, for instance, neurofeedback has been used for attention disorders, where actually the theta waves are actually quite increased.
One thing I think we have not done very much, and that could be, I think, a good avenue, is about neurotransmitters. You know, we didn't do a lot of...
That's what my next question was going to be.
You're
reading my mind.
Yes.
So my next question is basically, exactly, one of the things will be, what about neurotransmitters? What about dopamine release? Because you are stimulating areas, you know.
For instance, in the case of the compassion meditation, knocking down the pain effect. I mean, obviously, you would want to look at opiates and different things like that. So maybe I think this we could do for sure.
Be more
PET scan.
More biological type of...
That's right.
Of PET scan to image dopamine release and things like that. That would be very interesting.
So I think this is something that one of the lab will definitely come to do. We did the near future, because that's very complementary of what has been done so
Yes.
far.
I mean, even though, of course, all these studies are certainly well designed, but there's also always the issue in terms of methodology of whether or not the differences that you're actually observing,
Yes.
especially when you're not doing longitudinal studies, in the sense that you start studying someone, let's say today, and you follow up this person as this person progresses in their in his or her spiritual practice over time, and that person can actually function as a control for itself. And
that's,
so,
yeah, well, that's called pre-post. That's not really control.
right. But then you have, of course, if you want to compare long-term meditators, people with 10, 20, 30, 40,000,
There's no way.
there is no way. You have to do cross-sectional studies.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the issue arises whether or not you are actually always matching for factors that could be eventually confounding factors in the control group versus
So,
the expert. So would you
No,
like
I agree
to
with you that personally, I'm not an active scientist, but the main thing I found inspiring when I work with Richard Davidson and Tanya Singer is I see how much time they spend, more than anything else, thinking of the right control, seeing loopholes in the methodology, and I think now I'm convinced that that's what makes a difference between a good scientific work and not, is the controlled, the methodology, because finding something you always find something somewhere, and so that's really what makes a good science, I think. It's a very, very well planned and thinking of all the controls of the other interpretations. And I went, because we were trying to expand that work in Asia, so I'm not going to quote, but I went to 1 or 2 MRI labs somewhere in Asia and studying meditation. And I, myself, being quite a novice, but having participated in elaborating the protocols with Richard Davidson and others, I could see from the start. I said, no, this is not going to work as a control. I could see that even, I'm not being such and I see how crucial it is to have good results, to have all this methodology right in place. And that's what's remarkable with those good labs. That makes the difference, I think.
would you like to?
Yes. I think that if we are discussing methodology, one of the questions that we have to have in mind is everyone can be a meditator.
Sure. You have a mind.
No, but are you sure? Because when you say in your amygdala study, you said you went back and you could predict the result by the size of the amygdala.
Yes.
You have some studies now from the NIH on religion and the brain, and see that some of the aspects of the religious life are connected with more or less developed areas of the brain.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
so
sorry.
maybe it's
I didn't
possible
express myself clearly. I was not saying that this was they predicted by the size of the amygdala before. The change of the amygdala over 2 weeks, how much it has shrunk, predicted the amount of prosocial behavior. That means it's not that you could, at the start, it was how much did they change, maybe how much they practiced. So it was just perfectly correlated, basically, and you could predict back. So then, of course, there will be, even in the long-term meditators, as you could see, the gamma, there was quite large differences among meditators. But compared to the control group, they were all vastly above. Simply among themselves, they were also very different.
No, but my question is, okay, they are different, but are they different at the beginning?
Many of them should be. But the thing is, if you take novices, then you see differences. So you have a group effect.
So that's the methodology. It's good is to have only meditators and see evolving on time, the long term and
No, but what you ask whether everyone could meditate for everyone, I think it's like you said, the piano is for everyone, but not everyone become a top player. But it doesn't prevent anyone to enjoy music. So what I mean to say, and I was joking, sorry for that, but we all have a mind, and the mind, we deal with the mind from morning till evening, whether what you call mind consciousness or brain function, whatever, it doesn't matter. But the mind can be our best friend, our worst enemy. So to be more, acquire greater skill to deal with the way your mind works, which meditation is mind training. This is, I think, anyone can train their mind in some way. Now, of course, the results and the difference may be vary considerably from one person to another, and those who somehow have extreme difficulty of mastering rumination and hyper-agitated mind, usually they will say, no, meditation, I can't do it, it's not for me. So in a way, they will not pursue, and they will not sort of feel inspired to continue to progress, but mind training, at least anyone can try. There's no counter-indication, that's what I meant.
No, I don't mean that. I thought
Yeah,
it was biologically different.
Yeah.
So, because one of the fields it's used in biofeedback, for instance. Now we can do that in the fMRI with real-time images.
Yes.
And we can see that in meditation, and we can see the effects on bipolar disorders, for instance.
So with the feedback I mentioned, what we did with empathy, there was one of the researchers, she volunteered to train for 3 days. And within 3 days, she could activate the insula quite specifically.
But
so
it's easier to get in.
yes, so it works.
Yeah.
I think that you wanted to
I
add.
think, in continuation, in the following of this discussion, I think it would be actually interesting to engage, in meditation, patients with bipolar disorder. I think would be an interesting thing. Can they actually avoid the hypomania, and also can they avoid depression? Or, for instance, schizophrenic patients, that will be more difficult, of course, to engage, but basically those who have psychotic, episodes. Could actual meditation prevent that? Because, some of those diseases, or depression, some of those states can be actually prevented with deep brain stimulation, and other actually have been quite known and well shown.
For normal depression, if I now call normal depression, now there have been very good studies showing that mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for people who had at least 2 or 3 serious episodes before. Why? Probably because they are more motivated, maybe. In any case, if they do 6 months of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is 80% meditation on mindfulness and 20% in time cognitive therapy, there is a 30-40% decrease of relapse. So that's as much effect as medication. But the good thing is, if you look a year post-training, they are still protected, while if you stop medication for a year, of course, you are not protected very quickly. So that was John Tisdale, Cinder Segal, Mark Williams doing those studies, was replicated in England, was replicated in Switzerland. So this is definitely something. For schizophrenia, there is something what's happening with the compassion meditation, very preliminary, they might help, but this is very, very tricky, as you can imagine. Well, the rest, I think, is, but for depression, I think there's now quite good evidence that it helps preventing relapse. And the reason is quite simple, because a lot of the depressive episode have to do with excessive rumination. So you really get so much engrossed in self-centered rumination about things happening to you and worries and the past and all these things. So if you can somehow have a little bit more mastery of this endless chaotic rumination and distance yourself a little bit from that, then you can see that you are more equipped to see that coming and sort of not being carried by that.
I think that we're coming fast to the end. I think at this point we would probably invite the audience to make 1 or 2 burning questions. If someone wishes to do it, please identify yourself and your institutional affiliation, so that
Hello, my name is Gustavo. I'm a student from ISMAI. I would like to...
I didn't understand, I'm sorry.
My name is Gustavo.
Yes.
I'm from ISMAI.
Okay.
I would like to go to the anxiety and depression theme that we saw before. And first, I'd like to thank you the opportunity to have Matthieu here in Porto. I think it's wonderful. But this is a very personal, direct question for me. And what I would like to know is, what's your take in the use or the use of
What?
Joining psychiatry and meditation. What I mean is medication as well as meditation to help get an equilibrium with anxiety and depression. Is that...
Does the question bear on the issue of whether you can use meditation in order to treat anxiety? Is that what you're
No, that is proved already,
Yes.
I think. The question is if, from Matthieu perspective, is it okay to use medication to treat anxiety, or is medication going to affect our spiritual being in some way? Is
To affect what?
If the medication, so what you're asking is whether if someone is on medication, on a pharmacological medication.
if it's okay from Matthieu perspective to do something like that to help people with severe anxiety, panic attacks, and so on, when the organism is already so deeply in pain and suffering, is it okay to do medication and try to find?
So I'm not totally sure about what you're asking, but in case of depression, it's never in the depth of depression that those techniques are used. It is always when the person is out of depression to prevent relapse. So within the deep of depression, that's first it doesn't work, and it doesn't seem to be. People will not engage in it anyway. So it has not been done at that stage because it seems not very appropriate, and then the medical things should follow their course. It's really because people are always apprehensive of relapse, and relapse happen when you had several episodes. So that has been shown remarkable effect on preventing relapse. That's the main thing, and that's the good news. Now about anxiety, of course, there are many levels of anxiety. So if it's just for regular anxiety about special life events, you are going to miss your plane or something, then definitely meditation can help. Now about deep chronic anxiety, again, I don't think I'm competent, and I don't think when you are in a major psychological problem, it's probably not the best time to begin with meditation, because then your mind is already so unsettled that, when you are sort of, say, balanced problem, it's not the day you start learning how to ride a horse. First you get back your normal physical balance, then you start to do something even more complex. So, and I have a friend who did 6 years of contemplative retreat, and also who is a qualified doctor, and whenever he has these cases, he says, first you get better, then we'll see about meditation.
Okay, thank you.
We'll take another question.
I would like to know...
Please identify yourself.
Oh, okay. I am Francisco Simões. I study physics in the science faculty of Porto University. And I would like to know what's the best meditation type to practice if you're someone who practices like half an hour a day.
Best meditation what? Sight.
Type of meditation.
Or type of meditation.
Yeah.
If you are what, you said?
someone who practices just like half an hour a day.
Oh, well, that's good enough to start with. You know, I can give you meditation 10 seconds every hour. It's not mine. It's from my friend Meng from Google. So when he first said that, we were all laughing and thinking, he's crazy, you know. But actually, it's a good idea. So at first I'll start with the 10 seconds every hour. And who says they don't have 10 seconds, right? So he has spread that throughout Google Campus, and it works very well. So every hour, not 24 hours, but say 6-7 times a day, for 10 seconds, you look around and see whoever is in your field of vision. And you do 10 seconds of full loving kindness meditation. May this person be happy, be safe. I wish that a lot of happiness. So you don't jump on them, kissing them, I love you. You probably get a slap. You don't do anything. You just think. And you know why, when he said that, we're all laughing. He said that in front of the Dalai Lama and Richard Davidson. He's really exaggerating. But if you think more carefully, you know, macro moments actually set a process. So if you open a flask of perfume for 5 seconds and close it, there'll still be perfume for 10 minutes. If you do that every 10 minutes, there's perfume all the time. So the idea is by repeating small periods, it sort of sets your mind. And it lasts more than 10 seconds, in fact, but it rekindles the process. So we also say traditionally it's better to have short, repeated period of meditation regularly than a big, 8 hours once every 2 months. It's like watering your plants, a little water every day, not a bucket every month, and the plant is dead in between. So that, I think, makes sense. Now, for 30 minutes, I think there's some, I'm here thanks to help for CASA, which is helping the homeless, and the Kanjur Rinpoche Foundation. So our wonderful teacher, who are the sons of my first teacher, Kanjur Rinpoche, they come often to Portugal, and they lead shamatha retreat. This is the most basic for everyone practice of calming the mind, having a clearer, calm mind. So if you can attend one of them, it's wonderful. Otherwise, I think, we don't have to do the same thing all the time. You could start by just stabilizing your mind a little bit, this monkey mind or this neuron chatter, by watching the breath. There are a lot of small books describing how to do that, just because the breath is very subtle. If you concentrate on a big red flashing light, you may see it and your mind can be completely somewhere else. But the breath is so subtle, of course you don't see it. If you distracted, then it's gone. So you can see whether you have been distracted or not. So you can do that for a while. And then personally, I think one of the most powerful meditation is the caring mindfulness. That means to bring back this feeling of human warmth, of good-heartedness, of loving kindness. I think that's so crucial for our society, for the quality of human relationship, for yourself. It is the supreme emotion. And I could not mention the work of Barbara Fredrickson, but she could show that just 8 weeks, again, 30 minutes a day of loving kindness meditation can change your vagal tone. It's something that's very stable, that makes you calmer. And usually it doesn't change very easily, but there was a significant change. So I think that to blend mindfulness with loving kindness, I call it caring mindfulness. I think that's the most useful way to spend your 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
and I think
thank
that
you.
On this note, I think that we will end our panel here. Good evidence has been shown that meditation is able to alter the baseline function and structure of the brain, which really underscores its plasticity. I would like to thank the members of the panel.
I would just like to 30 seconds to show what is compassion in action, if you could give me back the slides. Because in fact, it's nice to speak of compassion, but just to show that it's not just meditating in a hermitage. So with the CASA, of course, helping the homeless here in Portugal and many countries now, in France and Brazil. And I've been personally starting about 100 humanitarian projects in the Himalayas, in Tibet, Nepal, and India. Now we treat 100,000 patients every year, and we have 20,000 kids in the school that we build. So we build about 15 to 20 15 larger and smaller clinics like that. This is in Nepal, and we treat, we have a dental cabinet, we have a hospice, palliative care at home also, and we take care of here in India, we go with a mobile clinic to 150 villages in Bihar, and there's a lot to do there. We have a health center with the TB, the AIDS, and malaria program, and we have motivators in the villages, and also in Nepal, we build school entirely with bamboos. So here's a school built for 2,000 children in 3 months for 150,000 euros. Hard to beat. And then 60% girls, and bamboo lasts for 20 years. So we have 9 of those schools that more than 15,000 children. And in Tibet, we built 15 dispensaries like that. And so that's over 12 years. This is a nomad area where there was absolutely no medical facility whatsoever. And so we have a mother and child program to help better, safer delivery. And we need bridges, as you can see. This is our car. So we built 18 bridges all over different areas of Tibet. And we care for the elderly. And he's the happiest person in the world by far. And this one is not too bad either. And so this is the happiest woman in the world. And so we build schools. And so we do all kinds of wonderful things. And so this is some of the work we have been doing. And it's thanks to, this is a philosophical college the day of exams. So they are spaced out so that they don't copy on each other. But there is one is trying something, And we do the rekindle the traditional arts. And then we intervene in this earthquake area in Yushu where 5,000 people died. So we help 3,000 elderly and widows over 2 winters. And it's minus 20 in the winter. And this girl, we brought 6 trucks. This girl, the monks took her out of the rubble after 3 days. She was caught under the rubbles. Here she finds back her uncle. And now this year we are building an earthquake-resistant school at 4,000 meters high in eastern Tibet. And so this is a few things from there. This is the good, this guy, I was photographing him and he was thinking, who is it? Why is he photographing me? So I made a little smile and then he smiled. So everybody seems quite happy. This one doesn't need plastic surgery, it's quite good like that. And this is the beautiful landscape of Tibet. That's something else. That's about the environment. It's for next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just have to, and I would very much like to thank the main organizers and volunteers of Kangyur Rinpoche Foundation, of Songtsen, the Tibet House of Portugal, and of CASA for the organization of this meeting. Would also very much like to recognize the supporting institutions, primarily the Câmara Municipal do Porto for this wonderful venue. And finally, I would like to remind everyone that eventual profits from this meeting will revert fully to CASA, which is an IPSS that provides food and support for homeless people across the country. Thank you. Good night. Thank you. Very good.